back to the Ecosystem Project Demo, where we invite a guest to discuss an amazing Ethereum ecosystem project. I'm your host Pooja Ranjan from Ethereum Cat Herders team, and we are excited to have you here today. This is episode 12. Today we are diving into a project that revolutionized how developers and open source projects are funded and supported in the blockchain space. Yes, I'm talking about Gitcoin. Gitcoin has been a game changer for the community, empowering developers and fostering innovation through unique platform. We'll talk about the key features, community impact, and what's next for Gitcoin with a special guest with us. But before we get started, I would like to remind you to check out our previous episodes on different public goods funding projects space on Eat Cat Herders YouTube playlist and podcast. Links are available in the description. Now, without further ado, let's get to know our guest today, Sov from Gitcoin. Sov, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, good to be here. Thanks for taking the time.
We are thrilled to have you here. Well, Sov, we would like to begin this conversation and knowledge-filled session about Gitcoin. But before that, it would be really nice to have a little bit background of yours, how you get involved with the Gitcoin ecosystem and the Ethereum ecosystem in general.
Absolutely. I'll kick off the slideshow here, and that is actually my first slide. So, as I mentioned before we kicked off the presentation, I'm currently coming at you live from 2012 Toyota Tacoma. But usually when you meet with me, you'll see a wall of guitars and drums and things behind me. I'm an avid guitar player, and I never had a band of my own, and so I birthed them. My kids are my band. They play drums, bass, and sing for me as well. So that's a little bit of kind of like my story and hobbies that I like other than all things crypto. The way that I got interested in the concept of grants actually relates to that music, where I got involved in the crypto ecosystem in 2017, mostly learning about it in that bull cycle. When 2018 happened and the crash came, it was impactful for me. I was disappointed that, the music stopped. And so I was spending a lot of time at the time learning a lot about crypto, reading, Andreas Antonopoulos, Vitalik, like anything I could find to learn more about the space. I decided I was going to shift the large amount of time that I was spending on crypto to something locally to make some positive impact. We just moved to a new area and I wanted to be a good example for the kids. And so I took my son to drum lessons on Wednesday of every week. And across the street from the studio that I took him to was a food bank. And one day I walk across the parking lot to that food bank and meet the executive director, the then executive director at the time. And then 2 weeks later, I find myself as board president of that organization. They had $15,000 in the bank and they were 90 days from going under. That didn't happen. We were fortunate enough to ride out the COVID pandemic, raise a lot of funds through state, local, federal government, foundations, and in terms of grants, and really transform that food bank into something that's remarkable today. So that really started my experience with grants in the traditional sense as a 501c3. And so when the last bull market started, 2020, 2021, I started seeing all these different grant programs launch and just decided I needed a bear market hobby, as I call it, because I knew at some point the music would stop again. And so I started digging into these different grant programs. I'd never been a researcher, but I started writing articles on them, learning about the programs, keeping a list of them. And that evolved into something I could really never imagine. So since then, I've been a grantee. I've worked with some of the largest grant programs in the space, help with grant matching for other people to find grants. I've consulted different grant programs and kind of how they design and implement their program. I've helped drive adoption of grant tooling. I previously worked for an organization called Questbook that's built grants tooling platform. And then today, I am the head of grants at Gitcoin, which means I'm responsible for business development and partnerships. So I help to grow adoption of our products like Gitcoin Grant Stack. I also help to find people that want to build on top of Allo Protocol and find interesting use cases for that. And it's truly been a whirlwind. My background before coming to Gitcoin was I led a systems integrator. I was their chief operating officer for a number of years and made the pivot to working full-time in the crypto side of things just last year. And if you want to find me, I'm Sovereign Signal on X or Sov on Farcaster. So that's a little bit about me and my background.
Awesome. That's pretty interesting. It's always lovely to talk to people who are not natively from the blockchain space, but trying to contribute to the blockchain ecosystem in general. And hearing about your story, I find it pretty interesting that your interest was already from 501c3 kind of organization and Gitcoin. I'm not sure the legal status of that, but that project is definitely helping many other nonprofit organizations. Well, as
Yeah.
we see on the screen, we have got a presentation to be shared today. Let's get into the presentation.
So I always like to start with this slide that tells a little bit about the journey of Gitcoin over time. Many people have heard about Gitcoin. They're familiar with Gitcoin grants and the program that we've run for some time. That journey really started as this idea of our founder, Kevin Owocki, back in 2017. Kevin recognized that there was this opportunity that crypto provided to incentivize open source developers that were under incentivized or didn't have aligned incentives at the time. He started testing out hackathons and bounties and different ways that developers could get coins, as we say. In 2020, the Quadratic Funding White Paper was authored by Vital McButerin, Glenn Weil, and others. When Kevin saw that, he realized that was it, right? Like crypto enables the ability to have these novel funding mechanisms and open up new possibilities for how we can fund, different types of growth in the ecosystem. That's when he developed the concept of Gitcoin grants. We just finished our 20th season of Gitcoin grants. And so that's a quarterly festival of giving that happens every quarter for us. It focuses on open source software, digital public goods through the Gitcoin grants program that we run. And so there's been funds that we've been given by the greater Ethereum community over time that we view ourselves as the steward of. So that's an important distinction I like to make, is that the funds that Gitcoin gives out through Gitcoin grants is not funded through our treasury. It's funded through contributions that have been given to what we call Gitcoin.eth, which is where those funds are held. And then we view ourselves as the stewards of that. And so we have our own OSS Gitcoin grants program that funds Web3 infrastructure, dApps and apps, developer tooling, those types of things. But then we also have this concept of community rounds, where any community can now come and propose ideas to Gitcoin on funding what matters to them, as we say. We approve up to 5 of those per Gitcoin grant season. We provide them some amount of matching funds. They don't have to have funds of their own to bring to the table, but many of them do. And then they can run their own rounds alongside the Gitcoin grants rounds. So over time, we've been running that Gitcoin grants program. We decentralized into a DAO somewhere around 2021. And now we're moving into this new phase that we call Gitcoin 2.0. We still have the Gitcoin grants program. That's an important part of who we are and what we do, but that isn't all that Gitcoin does. In many ways, it's really painted the vision for what Gitcoin could become as we move more into this space of being what we call multi-mechanism. What enabled that was the development of what's called Allo protocol. And so for much of the history of Gitcoin grants, it was run on a centralized stack that Kevin essentially built, hacked it together in his basement when he built the original Gitcoin grants. There was a conscious decision that was made about 18 months ago to take that stack and to centralize it. And that was the beginnings of Allo protocol. Allo protocol allows for development of different types of strategies, and you can apply those strategies to funding pools. And so we use GrantStack, which we'll do a demo of here a little bit later, to run our quadratic funding rounds. We also have direct grants that you can run using GrantStack. And then we've developed other types of mechanisms like easy retro funding and others, all developed on top of Allo. So that's really where Gitcoin is going as we move into Gitcoin 2.0, is driving development of Allo, driving adoption of GrantStack, and really looking at how we become more of the coordination layer in the way that funds are being allocated and distributed versus just being the Gitcoin grants program. So like I mentioned, over the past 5 years, we've supported the funding of public goods to an impressive amount. We've raised about 60 million over that time towards open source software, digital public goods. More than 3,700 projects have raised funds through Gitcoin and 4.2 million donations. In those projects that raise funds, you've seen some of those like Uniswap and Neuron Finance and others that were early recipients of Gitcoin grants. And now obviously they don't need the Gitcoin grants program. They've done pretty well on their own. And so we definitely view ourselves as a breeding ground for these types of projects that could emerge. Still today, we fund open source projects that remain open source and maybe never have kind of like a monetization strategy. And we're an important part of the funding streams that they bring in to sustain. So when we visualize what that stack looks like for Gitcoin 2.0 today, it really looks like this. We have our Allo protocol, which is the smart contract layer that I mentioned, runs on any EVM. And so it started on Ethereum and it's grown to now, I think, a dozen or more different chains that Allo's been set up on. On top of that, we're building out an app layer. So that is GrantStack, but GrantStack is not the only app. We've built Easy Retro PGF, which I'll talk about a little bit later, which essentially forks the optimism model of retro funding built on top of Allo. We're working with Arbitrum to develop the Easy Incentive Program app, which will help streamline the processes around LTIP and STIP and the incentive programs that they do. There's grant ships that have been built, which is a project that has kind of a gamified approach to grant funding, and many others that we're in talks with. And so as we have Allo protocol now, our hope is that we scale out this app layer and provide all sorts of possibilities in terms of the types of applications that people can use on top of Allo to do funding and allocation. And then as that application layer scales, the program layer scales as well. So for many years, the Gitcoin grants program was the program at the program layer. Today, Gitcoin still runs that program, as I mentioned, and it's a fairly large part of what we do from the program layer perspective. But now there's other ecosystems that are coming to us where Gitcoin offers services that allows us to design, implement, and manage grant programs. And so that's part of my job. And what I do is helping, to run those grant programs, provide consultation and advice for those program managers. Or if you have the resources in-house that you need to manage a grant program end to end, we can just provide the stack. We can provide the tooling and basic support. And so there's really like a spectrum of support, that we can provide and services that helps to extend that program layer. So when I jump into this slide, it really talks about the most common mechanisms that we see happening today. I'd like to show this slide because it's an easy visual representation of the lion's share of the funding that you see in the space today. Direct grants, whether it be in crypto or kind of like the broader landscape of grant giving, is by far the most common form grants that are out there today. And so that's basically there's an organization that has some pool of funds. They set an eligibility criteria for that pool of funds. Applications come in. And whether it be a grant manager, a grant analyst, a grants committee, some centralized decision-making body makes decisions on those applications, and then they can allocate those funds based on milestones or lump sum or whatever it might be. This is how many programs are functioning today in the crypto space. I think direct grants is a great solution for narrow scoped RFPs or bounties or those types of things. But the limitations of direct grants is it really doesn't democratize the decision making. I mean, it doesn't necessarily enable communities to help with the decision-making process. And so that's a lot of what quadratic funding actually does. Quadratic funding at a high level, you still have an organization or a team, different organizations that put up a pool of funds. They create an eligibility criteria around those funds. Grantees would enter into the round and decisions would be made about which grantees are accepted. And then once the grantees are accepted into the round, a crowdsourcing or crowdfunding campaign opens up where supporters, community supporters, come in and vote with their dollars or their tokens on what projects that they find the most interesting and relevant. As those donations come in, it contributes to the quadratic funding mechanism in terms of how those matching funds that were put up would be distributed. So a very simplistic example I would give of quadratic funding is one project may come in and let's say they receive one donation for $100. And let's say there's a second project that receives 10 donations for $10. Both of those projects received $100, but the project that received 10 donations gets a higher proportional share of the matching funds because they got more votes. So at a high level, that's how quadratic funding works. This is the mechanism that we've been using some time for our Gitcoin grants program, and we're helping other programs to run as well and democratize the decision-making process around how grants are given and involve their community more in that. Another common form of funding that we see today that is definitely getting a lot of attention is that of retroactive funding, previously known as retroactive public goods funding, RPGF, that Optimism pioneered. And so the way this funding mechanism works is very similar to the others in some ways. You still have a pool of funds. You still have an eligibility criteria around that pool of funds. People would still enter in and apply to that round. Once the applications are approved and the round opens up, instead of a crowdfunding campaign, you have a group of experts, or as Optimism calls them, badge holders, that would come and place votes on the projects that have entered the round. And then based on the votes and how the votes are weighted, the funds would be dynamically allocated to those projects. The way that Optimism has always staged this is they want to take a look at the impact that has been made over time versus direct grants and quadratic funding is more of a forward-looking funding mechanism in many respects, where you're funding projects in the hopes of what they'll do with that funding in the future. Optimism has looked at this in terms of we're funding projects based on what they've done in the past, and we're bringing in these experts or these badge holders to help make that decision. There's some interesting things coming down the pipe from Optimism and Gitcoin that I'll hint at a little bit here, where we're starting to take and iterate on the retroactive funding mechanism and find ways that we may be able to make that more programmatic and more automated based on network level metrics and those types of things. So taking human decision making even further out of the equation and looking at ways that we can actually measure, the impact at a network level is something that we're starting to explore that I think you'll hear more from us about soon. When we think about the landscape of OSS and what funding looks like today, I always come back to this picture that I'm sure many here have seen before, where you have this hyperstructure, and then there's some random person in Nebraska that's been thanklessly maintaining that since 2003 that holds the whole hyperstructure up. In a nutshell, this is a lot of open source, and it underpins much of our society today, our systems, and has contributed to a lot of the innovation that we've seen around just technology for the last few decades. But in reality, the current state of funding for open source software leaves some to be desired. It uses mostly legacy nonprofit fundraising models to sustain itself. There is a lack of incentives that are aligned to those developers and teams that are this block holding up the hyperstructure. There's a reliance on voluntary contributions, and ultimately this creates fragility in the system. The opportunity that we believe sits there that Gitcoin hopes to help with is that offering a plurality of funding mechanisms. So as I showed before, there's already funding mechanisms that are outside of just direct grants that are built and wide use today that we've designed and implemented on top of Allo protocol, with many teams building more. And so we believe that offering that plurality of funding mechanisms gets to a place that you have optionality around the types of ways that you can raise funding, and there's different pluses and minuses to those options. It aligns the incentives much more, especially when you have options in terms of how the funding works. You start to reward based more on impact versus rely on voluntary contributions. And hopefully, if we do this right, it becomes more of an anti-fragile system versus the fragility that exists in the system today. And so when we think about where Gitcoin is at today and where we see in the future, and the market opportunity that we see with what we're doing, as I mentioned before, direct grants, quadratic funding, we just are implementing conviction voting, which is another coordination funding mechanism with gardens. There's retroactive funding and even streaming quadratic funding that we've developed, super fluid. In the future, there's all different types of funding mechanisms that we want to create, and we're actively working on with teams. And then as that stack grows, that grows the opportunities for how you can use these funding mechanisms and the options that you have for the different networks that Allo Protocol is present on. When you look at the TAM for on-chain capital allocation, we believe it's 1 trillion or more, so that's a pretty large number. And so for us, we believe this is our opportunity, right, to be able to create more of that coordination and funding layer, spread that across the greater EVM ecosystem, and then ultimately work with teams to design, implement, and manage these programs so that ultimately we can create more aligned incentives and more opportunities to grow the pie and grow the number of people that are coming into the crypto space. And so from here, I'd like to go into a demo and show a little bit of the stack that we've built. I'll exit out presentation mode here and jump into GrantStack. So anyone can go to gitcoin.co/GrantStack, check out the tool. It's fully permissionless. It's built on top of the Allo protocol that I mentioned, so you don't need Gitcoin's permission to use this. GrantStack is a stack of 3 different things at its core. For one, there's Builder. Builder is essentially the place that if you're an applicant or a grantee and you're looking to apply to a grants round, you come and create a Builder profile. The way that you do that is you would log in using a wallet. And you can see here some of the test profiles that I built. Fairly easy to do. You would click New Project. You would select the network that you want to launch it on. So you can see here a list of the different EVM networks that we have today, with more in the pipeline to be added. You would click Next, and pretty simple. You would name the project. You would give it a website. You can upload your logo, a project banner, give your project a description, click Next, sign a transaction, and that's it. Once you've done that, you would be able to go, and your profile would be located here. And you can see here a test profile that I've set up. You can even see the different applications that I've applied to across the different rounds. So pretty simple. For anyone that's participating in the Gitcoin Grants program today, or participating in rounds that we run on top of Gitcoin Grant Stack, you would create a Builder profile as really the first step to be able to apply to those. And then that starts to build up a history over time of the different applications that you've applied to. The other part of Grant Stack is what we call Explorer. So Explorer helps with discoverability of the different rounds that we're running on top of Grant Stack. You can see here, if you go to the home page, you can click on Explore Rounds. You can see the different rounds that are running on top of Grant Stack. So if I'm a builder, I can create a profile. I can come here and I can start to look at the different rounds that I can apply to. I can click into those rounds, and you can see here it gives some high-level details on the round stats, if funding has been allocated, what projects have been approved to the round, and then I can click on Apply Now, use my builder profile, and easily apply to that. So we're trying to make it as smooth and seamless a process as possible for people to find the different rounds that are running on top of GrantStack and easily apply to them, and increase the discoverability of those using this tool that we built called Explorer. The last part of GrantStack is called Manager. So if I'm a program manager and I'm looking to create grant rounds, this is where I would mostly live. You can hop into Manager, and you're probably going to see a gnarly number of programs under my profile because I create a lot of them, but pretty easy to do. You would come in here, you click Create Program, you would name it, you add the different wallet addresses that would be administrators on that program, so they would have the ability to add grant rounds, approve applicants, do payouts, all those types of things. You can come in here with an EOA. You can also link a safe as well, and so we do have multi-sig support for those that want to link a multi-sig and use that instead of a hot wallet. So pretty easy. You would add the name of the program, the wallet, click Save and sign a transaction. Once that's done, your program would appear here. Once the program is set up, you can click in here and you can see the different types of rounds that are running. You can see we have quadratic funding and direct grants available here. Retro funding is a separate interface, which I'll show here in just a second. And so to create a round, it's fairly simple. You click Create Round. You would select whether or not you want to do quadratic funding or direct grants. So we'll try quadratic funding. You would name the round. You would put how you want people to contact you if they have questions. You would give the applications a start and an end date. You can enable rolling applications, so not time bound those, or you can put time boundaries around them. You can have the round start and end date. So applications is when applications come in, obviously, and people can apply to the round. The round is when donations are opening up for QF round. If this were direct grants, you wouldn't have this time bound around the round. You would just have dates for when you want to accept applications. You have the option to make your round public, meaning it will show on Explorer, the site that I showed earlier, or you can make the round private, which means you're provided a link, and that link would have to be provided for anyone that you want to apply to the round. So we'll go ahead and do some dates here. Click next. You would choose the token that you want to pay out from. So these are the tokens that we have integrated in Arbitrum today. Depending on the network that you create rounds on, other tokens would be available. It's pretty easy for us to spin up tokens as long as they're ERC20, permit to capable, we can add them in. So if you're an ecosystem that desires to set up a round and you want, a custom token added, that's definitely something that we can consider, and I'd love to talk with you about that. So for this round, we would name how much matching funds we want. So again, this is the pool of funds that will be allocated based on the decisions made by the community in the crowdsourcing campaign. You can set a matching cap, which means any project in the round cannot receive more than this percentage of the total matching funds available. Typically, we set matching caps between 5 and 10%. If you got questions about that, that's definitely something we can consult with you on and kind of find the best fit. You can set a minimum donation threshold. And so this is the minimum amount someone has to donate for it to count towards the matching results. And then you have some options around Sybil defense, which is a whole other subject, probably more time than I have here to talk about, but just know that QF rounds can be gamed if you're not careful and you have considerations around Sybil defense. We've developed some pretty strong protections around that, and we're happy to jump in and share more details on how those work. For this, we'll disable Passport, which is one of the tools that we built just to kind of move through the round setup, but just know there is options there and we can definitely consult with you on what works best if interested. You would add a description for your round here. You would add eligibility requirements here. These essentially would be the requirements that grantees would have to meet to be able to apply to the round. So you can make that clear here, the applicants you're looking for. And then from here, think of this as almost a type form. This is the questions that you're going to fill out that grantees would answer. These are all default questions that will be answered by the builder profile that they have. So it will be audio associated with their application. You can have people add their Twitter, their GitHub. You can have them verify that they own those accounts too, as a way to cut down on spam or false applications. And then from here, you can edit the different types of questions that you want. One is payout wallet, so that is required that people add the wallet that they want funds sent to. Aside from that, you can choose the different types of fields that you want to add to the application. Click that. You could add yes, no questions. You can add paragraph summaries, like whatever it might be, similar to, Typeform or Google Forms or those types of things. You can add that in. And then once we're done with all these questions, you would click launch, sign a transaction. Again, everything happening with GrantStack is on chain. And then once that's done, your grant round would show up here. And then as applications start to come into that grant round, you can review those, approve them, move them through a workflow where you receive them, you approve or deny them. Once approved, you can do milestone-based payouts, anything you want that way in terms of being able to manage the grant applications all the way from intake to payout, all the way through their life cycle. So that at a high level is GrantStack. We've kind of reviewed that GrantStack is three main components: builder, explorer, and manager, and the different use cases for each of those components. The last thing I'd like to show here is retro funding, because I talked a little bit about easy retro funding and retroactive funding with Optimism. This is a tool that we built and forked the way that Optimism operates their retro funding rounds. We actually did this in partnership with Optimism. The way this works is you log in, and it has a very similar interface to GrantStack in some ways, where you can create rounds. Anyone can go here and do this. And when you create those rounds, you set the round details. You can set the different phases and timelines for the rounds. You can denote the different network a round can run on, the token. You would create a pool from which you allocate tokens, and this is the pool that funds would be distributed from. You can add different admin accounts. You can see my .eth is grantfarmer.eth, which I'm very proud of. You can add different voters. So these are the people that would be the decision makers in those rounds. You can give them different types of voting power. This is where you can start to review the applications and look at the information in terms of the grantees that have applied. And then once the round is over, you would do payouts all from here. As Gitcoin moves forward, we really desire to build more modular applications like this on top of Allo Protocol versus building more of a monolith app with GrantStack. And so the intent is that we're going to keep GrantStack, quadratic funding, and direct grants for now, but you probably won't see applications like retro funding and others make their way into GrantStack. We'd much rather build more of an ecosystem of apps that run on top of the Allo protocol. And at some point, you may see GrantStack evolve into more of a hub where you can go and find all the different applications running on top of Allo protocol versus it just being quadratic funding and direct grants today. So that was kind of all that I had for a demo. Other than that, I know there were some other questions we wanted to dive into, and so I think it'd be great to jump into those.
Awesome. I think this was great. Appreciate sharing this presentation. It provided a very good overview of past, present, and what Gitcoin holds for users and projects in the future. Different types of grant. You talked about quadratic funding, direct grant, RPGF, and kind of democratizing the decision-making process. I hope the demo would be helpful to many users and projects to get on board easily. You have already answered most of the questions that we had in mind, yet we would take a few to get more information on that. So getting on that, let's start from innovation and autonomy. Like Gitcoin introduced two new business units called Grant Labs and Passport. You briefly touched on those aspects as well. If I understand correctly, these units will enhance the selection process and maybe help the infrastructure and build the civil resistance. Could you talk a little bit more about Grant Labs or the Passport, and how do you see this being used by different projects in the ecosystem? Are you aware of any project those are already making use of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So Grants Lab is the organization that I contribute under as head of grants. Passport is actually in the process of spinning out of Gitcoin. They just submitted their last budget proposal, and they're actually going to spin out as a separate company. Originally, we developed Passport as a means of civil defense, and they've done quite a good job of that over time. They're actually starting to build tools that look at data analysis and like different types of use cases that actually sit outside of some of the core reasons that they were developed internally to Gitcoin. So it's been really cool to see that business unit grow. Kyle Weiss, our former executive director, will be taking the lead with Passport, with Jeremy as the product manager and also the lead on the Passport side of things. And so we continue to work with them very closely. There's lots of shared clients that we have between Passport and, Gitcoin, but there is a bifurcation happening that way. And a big reason for that is Gitcoin, we really want to squarely focus on grants. We believe that grants equals growth and Gitcoin equals grants, as we say. And so in that, there's more and more of a focus for us in narrowing down the focus and the products and those types of things that Gitcoin is doing to what I've talked about here. How do we continue to grow development on top of Allo Protocol? proliferate the products that we've already built, both internally to Gitcoin and with our partners, and then grow that program layer that operates on top of Gitcoin a la protocol.
That's interesting. You did mention in the presentation about being careful while using the QF funding rounds, like QF rounds can be gamed if not have enough Sybil mechanism. I'm hoping that this passport thing could be one of those Sybil mechanism. Do you have any other thing that can help if not passport?
Yeah, absolutely. We have some dedicated resources that work on the Grants Lab team. Joel Miller and Umar Khan, I'd love to call them out. They are gigabrains, as I like to say, when it comes to quadratic funding and civil defense. Passport team has also contributed a ton to that understanding and knowledge we have around civil defense over time. We've actually developed a variant of QF that we call cluster matching. And so this is a way that it takes a look at results from QF rounds, and it looks at ways that different wallets cluster together, hence the name cluster matching. And it can help to filter out wallets that have suspicious behavior and provide, more credibility in the QF results. And so we're in the process of actually productionizing, if that is a word, the use of cluster matching, or as we call it, COCM, native in the GrantStack tool. And so part of the options that you saw in the demo that I provided is you can use Passport as a way to gate people where they have to have a certain Passport score before they can enter a round. There's also ways that you can use cluster matching, and we provide different dashboards and data analysis that's becoming more and more automated, where people can jump in and basically see what those cluster matching results would be, and then use that for their round. And so we're actually in the process with a few programs today testing that. There's a payout that's going to happen with one of the programs that we're doing just this week with our more production, ready version of cluster matching. And it's something that we've tested over time with our own Gitcoin grants round. So there's a lot of faith in that approach. And we're definitely excited to make that more extensible to anyone that's using GrantStack and, our tools going forward.
Interesting. I'm sure our listeners are getting some sneak peek of new and upcoming features with Gitcoin in the future. Well, Gitcoin shared an exciting roadmap update for 2024, Gitcoin version 2. As I understand, the primary focus for this year is on enhancing the grant program and to support a broader range of projects and initiatives. This year, we have 3 grants round as shared, and people are hoping that it would be back to 4 from 2025, I think. Yeah. So, as per the first grant round, just to add some more context over here, the ETCAT herders are seen as educators, community builders, and contributors to facilitate Ethereum protocol development. So, in the past, we have received public good funding grants from different teams like Optimism, ENS, and we also have been participating in Gitcoin since ages. But last Gitcoin round, GG20, when conducted this year, we tried to reach out to the coordinators of grant and try to figure out if we have a good fit room for projects like us, projects who are not directly into development, but definitely building community and kind of supporting the ecosystem in general. Do we see this thing to be overcome in future grant round, and we would see some more room for adjusting these kind of projects?
Yeah, sure. So I can speak on that. Like I mentioned before, there's a few different kind of parts to Gitcoin grants. For one, we did some pretty major upgrades to our Allo contracts earlier this year, which contributed to the reason that there's only 3 grant rounds running this year versus 4. We are going to go back to that quarterly cadence and continue that. So no worries there. When we look at our eligibility criteria, we're basically landing where our OSS program, Open Source Software Digital Public Goods, will have 3 primary pillars. It will have developer tooling, it will have Web3 infrastructure, and it will have dApps and apps. Each of those has publicly published eligibility criteria on our forum. And so I'm happy to explore that with Ethereum cat herders, or even maybe there could be projects or teams that are working under the umbrella of Ethereum cat herders that it might make sense for them to apply as their own separate entities. That's really my job, and then Matilda, who's the program lead for Gitcoin grants. And so we'd love to engage with this community and find a fit for the places that you can participate. Aside from that, we're always open to trying more experimental rounds. And so in GG20, we had a hackathon round that basically said if you participated in a Web3 hackathon over the last 18 months, I believe it was, you were eligible to participate. And so we may be doing more experimental rounds like that. In addition to the Gitcoin Grants OSS program rounds, I mentioned this concept of community rounds. We're actively taking applications for community rounds today. And so you mentioned ENS. ENS was a community round that we ran during GG20. We also had the Climate Collective, HyperCerts, Token Engineering Commons, and Open Civics that ran rounds in GG20. And we anticipate most of those projects will probably reapply for GG21. An important thing to note is that the community rounds is not a decision that's made by Gitcoin core contributors. We've appointed a community council of people that are active in the Gitcoin ecosystem to make those decisions around which community rounds will be provided the matching funding that we allow. Those applications are open until July 15th. And so I would encourage any of the listeners that have a community that may be interested in running your own quadratic funding round. Maybe that's even Ethereum cat herders, runs your own quadratic funding round. We'd love to explore that. We'd love to have you submit an application and see if that could be a fit. In addition to that, we are also thinking about piloting this concept of what we call ecosystem rounds. And so larger ecosystems like Celo, Arbitrum, Scroll, and others have shown interest in running their own ecosystem-specific rounds alongside the Gitcoin grants. And so I believe we're going to be piloting that concept in GG21, probably starting with Arbitrum and Celo. And so I say all of that to say Gitcoin Grants is a quarterly festival of giving. We definitely intend for that quarterly festival to continue quarterly, as we move forward now that those major upgrades are done on the Allo protocol layer. And whether it be the community rounds that are run by communities, funded and supported in some respects by Gitcoin, but not run by Gitcoin, whether it be the ecosystem rounds with large ecosystem players that are actively looking for builders to kind of grow their ecosystem through all types of means, or the rounds that we run directly as our open source software digital public goods program, I'd have to believe that there's opportunities there for Ethereum cat herders in that wider community to participate in probably more than one place.
That is interesting. And thank you for sharing that. I hope listeners would be paying attention on this July 15th because this is very close. But definitely for other upcoming rounds, this is very good piece of information. We'd be happy to share more about it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, the roadmap emphasizes on sustainability and the long-term impact. I would be curious to hear your thoughts and ideas with the team on how do we make this Gitcoin version 2 more sustainable.
Absolutely. So when we think about our Gitcoin grants program, we're starting to talk about some ideas internally around what sustainability looks like. We've been fortunate enough to be given a significant amount of funds over time from the community that we've been stewards of. And so, those funds are not in jeopardy anytime soon of going away. And we anticipate that the Gitcoin grants program will be able to continue for some time. Discussions around sustainability are paramount for us, though. That's something that myself and Matilda are thinking about every day. And there are some ideas around whether it be the ecosystem rounds that we run or maybe ways that people that are contributing to Gitcoin grants could donate directly to the Gitcoin grants program to sustain it, that we are thinking through around what sustainability could look like for Gitcoin grants and the program side of what we do. For Gitcoin as a whole and Grants Lab, we are actively developing products and we're looking at opportunities around monetization of those products, but we are funded currently by the Gitcoin Treasury. We're much more interested in finding proper product market fit, learning from the ecosystems large and small on products that are valuable to them and how those products can be applied, to create value before rushing into too much of a monetization strategy. And so all of that to say, it's top of mind for us. We definitely want to create sustainability. I hope I'm here 10 years from now having a conversation with you around the success that we've had around that, but we don't want to rush that, whether that be with our Gitcoin grants program or, Grants Lab. So there's more to come that way. I think that you'll start to see more information in GG21 and GG22 as we start to think through what sustainability means for Gitcoin grants. And I think as we go into next year, our product and our engineering teams and ultimately leadership will be sharing probably more information that way around potential monetization strategies, whether that be directly at the Allo protocol or the products like GrantStack that sit on top of it.
That's very helpful to know. We would like Gitcoin to stay around for helping many more projects in the ecosystem. I hope the products that you are building may be very useful for all open source projects that never have to think about funding strategies. The products that you are building around quadratic funding and making retroactive funding easier could be contributing to the sustainability of the Gitcoin in future. I hope so, along with your other projects. Very well. I love the demo that you have shared, and I hope that it will help projects and users to get on board. Do you have any tips and tricks for developers looking to get more engaged on their project through Gitcoin?
Sure. I think that definitely come create a builder profile, look at Gitcoin Explorer, follow our socials, attend our community calls. Like we're definitely taking steps, both Gitcoin internally and then working with our ecosystem partners to extend more opportunities out to our builder community. There's also going to be quite a bit of work that Matilda is going to be leading from the program side of things to figure out from a builder community side of things, how do we better retain our builders? How do we better give more opportunities to those builders from partner ecosystems and Gitcoin as well? Many ecosystems come to Gitcoin because of the reach and exposure that we have to our builder community. And so we definitely think there's more opportunities that could be had there on how we can direct that builder community to opportunities in those partner ecosystems outside of just Gitcoin and the opportunities that we have through our own programs. And so I would say that that is one of our key pillars, when we look at our strategy and the things that we want to achieve with Gitcoin grants. Sustainability is one, and kind of the builder community retention and growth of that community is two.
Interesting. Just talking about all this community and the impact that Gitcoin is trying to make over here, we would love to see Gitcoin community growing over the years. I wonder if you have any story, any success story or notable project that have been funded through Gitcoin, and the story if you would like to share.
Yeah, the one that I like to share the most is the Uniswap Arbitrum Grant Program, right? So the Uniswap Arbitrum Grant Program came as a result of Uniswap receiving a large airdrop from Arbitrum when the airdrop happened. Uniswap was an early Gitcoin grantee in one of the single-digit grant rounds, and they raised funds over time through Gitcoin grants. Obviously, Uniswap is arguably the most successful protocol in the crypto space today, very noticeable. They're doing pretty well for themselves. So I always like to tell the story where Uniswap got some of its starts from Gitcoin, and we're very proud of that. When the airdrop happened, there was a group that approached the Uniswap DAO and basically proposed that they would like to use the airdrop that was provided to Uniswap to create a shared Uniswap Arbitrum Grant Program known as UAGP. They worked with Gitcoin on that. They're still working with Gitcoin on that. And so if you go to Explorer, the page that I showed earlier, you can see some of the rounds that they have available today. You can check out the Uniswap DAO forum and see some of the updates from UAGP, as we call it. So that's one success story I would give that I'd love to see more of is Uniswap had early success working with Gitcoin. We work with Arbitrum as well. We've worked with them in GG20 and other things through ThankArb, a partner that we work with that helps to support growth in the Arbitrum ecosystem. And now we're working with this shared grant program that was developed as a result of the success of Uniswap and the success of Arbitrum. And so I think that there's more opportunities like that as these larger ecosystems grow, as they look to find ways that they can enable downstream grant programs. We'd love to hear from them and build some strategy around that and see more growth happen where Gitcoin can be here to support these chains, these ecosystems, these networks as they're just getting started and launching their grant programs. And over time, as those things start to reach maturity, there could be opportunities where they could create downstream grant programs that they don't necessarily manage, but they enable that we're actually starting to look at and have already seen happen through Optimism, through Arbitrum, and I think that trend will continue.
Pretty fascinating. I always love to hear these kind of stories for early days of projects and getting evolved over a period of time. And something on the related note, I would also like to share a story here, and I'm very excited about it. I was one of those people who heard about Gitcoin when it was launched. I tried to dig out the email that I received from Kevin Owaki on September 25, 2017. It was just a simple message saying, is there any interest in including the launch of Gitcoin.co today in your next newsletter? At the time, I was running a newsletter at etherworld.co. So it was a message I received from Kevin. I'm super excited to see this project getting so big today. And it's really one of those projects, those were like very close to my heart.
No, I appreciate that. I work with Kevin daily. He would probably not want me to say this, but it's a little bit of a dream come true to be working with someone like him and the greater team here at Gitcoin to truly do something I love. And it doesn't feel like work. It kind of is the old adage where if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And I definitely feel fortunate that that's what the work here feels like.
Absolutely. This project is really one of those near and dear to my heart as well. So lovely to talk to you today. Yeah. Very well. We are getting close to the end of the conversation. If you have any final thoughts, what would be your message if you would like to share something with our listeners?
The message is pretty simple. It's I'd love to explore opportunities with anyone in the audience, right? If you're interested in learning more about how you could participate in the rounds that Gitcoin runs, how you could find more information on the rounds that our partner ecosystem runs, I'd love to help with that. DMs are always open. You're never going to flood me. I'm at Sov Signal on Telegram, Sov at Gitcoin.co on email. Or, obviously you can reach out to me through, some of the ways that will be provided after this presentation. Or if you're a program, or maybe you have ideas for a program that you could launch to create, a funding stream for developers or a community, I'd love to explore that with you too. Like I mentioned, we have community round applications open now through July 15th. So the deadline is coming up quite soon. It isn't an intensive application. And so I think anyone that's interested in that concept would be able to probably spend 30 minutes or an hour and complete the community round proposal. All of that is on our Gov forum, gov.gitcoin.co. That's a great place to find news and updates on all things in the Gitcoin ecosystem. And so that would really be the call to action. Like if you're looking for ways that you can fund and kind of like, grow the work that you're doing, I'd love to hear from you in that respect. And if you think that you have ideas or opportunities to build programs that can support others, I'd love to hear from you there too.
Absolutely. I'm hearing your message here, and I will definitely try to point people towards the team to learn more about it. And if they have their ideas and thoughts, suggestions to make Gitcoin even better.
Absolutely. I appreciate that.
Very well. We have covered a lot today, including a live demo. We can say that Gitcoin is not just a platform, but it's kind of movement that is aiming to support the open source development and the community. Thanks, all, for taking out time and share about the upcoming plan with us. We would encourage the Ethereum community to continue participating and supporting many projects with the Gitcoin platform. On behalf of Ethereum cat herders, I would like to thank the entire Gitcoin team as the platform has played an important role in the sustainability of Ethereum cat herders as well. So thanks, the team. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for joining us on this special episode of Ecosystem Project Demo. Remember, you can catch all our past episodes. Just head over to our YouTube channel and podcast and look for the Ecosystem Project Demo playlist. We'll be back with another interesting talk. Till then, keep listening, keep watching, and keep sharing your love with Ethereum cat herders. Cheers.